The illusion of unconditional affection is one of the most dangerous fantasies a man can hold. Most people do not love you for who you are. They love the version of you that validates their place in the world. As long as you are beneath them in power, in status, in strength, you remain safe. Your weaknesses make you likable. Your failures make you tolerable. Your dependency makes you lovable. You are the underdog they can support without threatening their own fragile sense of self. But the moment you begin to rise, the rules change. A man in motion, a man evolving, becomes a danger to static souls. The affection they once gave so freely begins to shrink, not because you have harmed them, but because your elevation exposes the cracks in their own identity. The truth is simple. Their love was never about you. It was about what you represented, a comfortable presence, someone struggling like them, someone they could feel better than. Your losing gave them significance, your doubt gave them purpose, and your silence made them feel wise. People want to support you as long as you remain controllable. They will cheer you on while you struggle because your ambition is just a fantasy. It entertains them. It doesn't challenge them. But when ambition becomes reality, when dreams turn into movement, into results, into proof, their pride begins to rot. The affection turns brittle. You will feel it. They stop asking questions. Their words become shorter. Their presence becomes sporadic. It's not because they're busy. It's because you're becoming too real. The dynamic that once made them feel superior is collapsing. Your wins, no matter how small, destabilize their inner hierarchy. They start to see you not as someone beneath them, but as a rival or worse, as a reminder of what they never became. And this is the hidden poison of human nature. The people who once nurtured you in darkness begin to resent you in light. Your growth becomes offensive. Your self-respect becomes arrogance. Your independence becomes rebellion. What they loved was not you, it was their dominance over you. As long as you needed advice, approval, or validation, you were lovable. As long as you were dependent, they felt noble in helping you. But when you begin to detach, when you build your identity beyond their reach, their generosity turns cold. The helping hand is withdrawn, the smiles fade, the embrace becomes a lecture, and the warmth turns into passive aggression. Even within families, affection often comes with invisible conditions. Parents may love their children when they follow the prescribed path, obedience, submission, tradition. But the child who defies that path and creates his own is often met with disapproval disguised as concern. Siblings who once played together may grow distant when one outpaces the other. Friends who laughed in broken rooms with you may go silent when you move into a room they can't afford. This is not hatred, this is ego defending itself. Humans are territorial about status, not just material status, but emotional and psychological positioning. They want to be needed, admired, and seen as superior, especially by those they consider close. The moment your success violates their place in that hierarchy, affection is withdrawn like a privilege revoked. You were never truly loved, you were managed. You were embraced not because of who you were, but because of where you stood. And the moment that position shifts, their feelings shift with it. Success is not celebrated by all, it is feared, resented, and quietly hated by those who have chosen comfort over effort. The average mind, though outwardly supportive, is deeply unsettled by the rise of someone they once considered equal. When you succeed, you do not simply achieve a goal. You disrupt a fragile psychological order. You become evidence that their excuses were lies. You become living proof that it was always possible, and that terrifies them. It doesn't matter how kind you remain, how humble you act, or how generous you become. Your existence as a winner reminds them of what they refused to become. In a room full of the ordinary, excellence becomes offensive. The average man does not want to feel inferior. He wants to believe that the world is rigged, that success comes from luck or privilege, that effort is wasted, and that no one really wins unless they cheat. So, when someone close to him begins to rise without shortcuts, without begging for validation, it challenges the story he has told himself for years. He can no longer blame fate. He can no longer say it was impossible. Instead, he is forced to admit silently and bitterly that it was always within reach, but he lacked the discipline to pursue it. The successful man becomes a trigger. His presence is a silent accusation. He doesn't need to say a word. His schedule, his results, his mindset, they all speak volumes. And those volumes say, you could have been more. That message is unbearable to the average mind. So rather than change, rather than rise to the challenge, the average man will attack the source of his discomfort. He will distance himself. He will speak behind your back. He will minimize your achievements. He will say you're obsessed, arrogant, or too intense. But behind those words is a wounded ego gasping for air. The psychology of envy is built on comparison. It is not that they want your success. It is that they believe you shouldn't have it before them. They measure your worth not by what you are, but by where you came from. If you both started in the same place and you advanced while they remained stagnant, your success becomes an insult. It doesn't matter how hard you worked or how much you suffered. What matters to them is that you've disrupted the illusion of equality. The lie they lived in, that you were all the same, has collapsed. Now they must either confront their own complacency or destroy the one who exposed it. This is why success is lonely. Not because people abandon you, but because they reveal who they really are. The applause dies down, the message is slow, the energy changes. You start to notice the subtle shade, the tight smiles, the carefully crafted compliments that sound like warnings. Don't forget where you came from. Don't get too ahead of yourself. These are not reminders. They are coded resentments. They are signs that your rise has shaken something in them that was never secure. Even those who once mentored you may begin to pull back. As long as you were beneath them, they felt wise. They could offer advice, play the role of the guide. But once your progress exceeds theirs, their mentorship turns into control. They offer suggestions not to help, but to slow you down. They want you to pause to second, guess, to feel guilty for growing beyond them. Their pride is wounded. Their ego is bruised. And instead of admitting that they stopped evolving, they paint you as the problem. This is the quiet war success starts. A war not fought with open hatred, but with silence, subtlety, and suppressed envy. The average mind cannot celebrate what reminds it of its own failure. It cannot cheer for someone who invalidates its laziness. So it does the only thing it can. It withdraws affection, rewrites the narrative, and tries to convince you that you're the one who changed. There is no wound more precise, no betrayal more poisonous than the one that comes from those who once claimed to love you. Open hatred is easy to detect. Enemies declare themselves. They speak in tones you recognize. Their intent is visible. But the ones who smile, the ones who hug you, the ones who stand beside you while quietly sharpening the knife, they are the true danger. Because you welcome them into the heart of your life, and by the time their mask falls, the damage has already been done. The hatred disguised as love moves slowly. It doesn't announce itself with rage. It whispers, it delays, it smiles too wide. It lurks behind praise that feels hollow, behind support that arrives too late, behind advice that always encourages you to play it safe. They do not stop you with force, they kill your momentum with kindness. They dilute your hunger. They lower your standards. And you confuse their poison for protection. This is the genius of hidden hatred. It manipulates you into sabotage under the illusion of care. Those closest to you, family, friends, lovers, often have the most to lose from your growth. Not materially, but psychologically. Because your transformation threatens their identity. If you rise too far above the version of you they've accepted, they're forced to question everything. Who they are, what they've done, where they stopped. And rather than rise with you, they prefer to pull you back into the image they once loved. Not because they truly love you, but because they loved the power they held over you when you were smaller. This kind of hatred is quiet. It's dressed in familiar language. It says things like, "I'm just worried about you. I want the old you back. Don't lose yourself." These phrases are not concern, they are emotional chains. They are meant to remind you that your freedom makes them uncomfortable, that your evolution unsettles the hierarchy they depended on. When you were broken, they could protect you. When you were confused, they could guide you. When you were weak, they could love you without fear. But now you are no longer weak, and what they called love cannot survive your strength. The dangerous part is, you will want to believe them. Because their face is familiar, their voice is soft, they know the history, they know what to say, and part of you, the part still chained to the past, will feel guilty for doubting them. That guilt becomes the perfect weapon. It keeps you apologizing for changing. It makes you explain your confidence. It makes you shrink your light so they won't feel insecure in your presence. You begin to dim your greatness to protect their comfort. And that is how disguised hatred wins, not by confrontation, but by seduction. What makes this form of hatred lethal is that it operates under the illusion of intimacy. These are not strangers. These are people who have seen your tears, who have shared your victories, who have sat beside you in moments of vulnerability. You gave them access, and now they use that access to control the direction of your future. They won't tell you to stop, but they will slow your steps. They won't insult you, but they'll plant subtle doubts. They won't block your path, but they'll keep reminding you of how far you might fall. And all of it is done with the tone of love. But real love does not resent growth. It does not demand you stay the same. It does not weaponize history. True love supports expansion, even when it outgrows the old connection. The hatred disguised as love does the opposite. It clings, it resists, it manipulates. And because it does all of this quietly, gently, and with a familiar face, it often succeeds where open enemies fail. You don't see it until it's too late. You don't resist it because it speaks the language of loyalty. And by the time you realize it was never love, you've already sacrificed parts of yourself trying to keep it alive. Power is not always taken often, it is silently transferred. The moment you begin to rise, even without saying a word, the entire structure of your relationships begins to shift. What was once a dynamic of familiarity becomes one of discomfort, not because you have changed as a person, but because your position has. When you were uncertain, you needed guidance. When you were struggling, you needed reassurance. When you were dependent, you were predictable. But the second you no longer require validation, protection, or approval, the balance of power begins to tilt in your favor, and that is where resistance begins. People build identities around their roles in your life. Some see themselves as your helper, your protector, your advisor, or even your superior. They define their importance through your dependence. As long as they could offer something you lacked, advice, shelter, resources, or even emotional support, they felt useful. But once you no longer need what they offer, once you begin to move on your own, their role weakens. And with it, so does their power. Power does not like to be challenged, especially by those it considers beneath it. Your rise introduces a new hierarchy, one that was never agreed upon. You are now independent, perhaps more skilled, perhaps wealthier, perhaps wiser, or simply more composed. And to those who once stood above you, this new order is unacceptable. They feel it before they understand it. A discomfort in the way you speak, a quiet confidence that wasn't there before, a clarity in your decisions that doesn't seek approval. You are no longer in orbit around their opinions. That threatens them more than open rebellion ever could. The shift in power becomes most visible in silence. They no longer speak to you the way they used to. Their tone loses warmth. Their eyes hold calculation. They begin to challenge your choices not with logic, but with emotional manipulation. They say things like "you're not the same anymore," or "don't let success change you," not because you've become worse, but because you've become untouchable. You've moved past the version of yourself they could influence, and now they are left questioning their relevance. This is where the subtle war begins, the war of control. They may try to reclaim influence through guilt, through memory, or through subtle sabotage. They might bring up the past to remind you of who you were, hoping to drag you back into a role that kept them comfortable. They'll invoke moments where they helped you, not to celebrate them, but to imply a debt. They want you to remember your place, the old place, the inferior place, because that's where they still feel powerful. And your refusal to return there is perceived as betrayal. The balance of power is rarely discussed, but always felt. When you become self-reliant, when you make decisions without asking, when your vision grows beyond their comprehension, you expose their stagnation. You no longer serve as an emotional crutch. You are not part of their controlled narrative. You are now a reminder of everything they failed to become. And rather than rise with you, they attempt to pull you back down to a level where they feel secure again. This imbalance also breeds subtle forms of punishment. They withdraw affection. They stop including you. They speak of you to others with faint sarcasm or hidden envy. They begin to narrate your life as if your confidence is arrogance, your distance is disrespect, your ambition is ego. In truth, you have only reclaimed the power you were once too uncertain to hold. But they do not see it as growth, they see it as rebellion. Not against them as people, but against the identity they were allowed to maintain when you were small. The shift in power becomes permanent the day you stop needing permission, when you stop explaining your moves, when you stop diluting your victories for their comfort. At that point, they know they've lost the version of you they controlled, and what remains is a version they can no longer influence. That realization breeds resentment, not because they hate your success, but because it removed them from the center of your world. Dominance in its purest form cannot be achieved through consensus, companionship, or collective approval. It is forged in solitude, in the cold, unrelenting silence, where distractions are stripped away and clarity is forced upon the mind. The pursuit of true power is a path that narrows with every step upward, and the higher you climb, the fewer voices can walk beside you. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a brutal reality. Greatness requires focus, and focus is diluted by the emotional weight of human attachment. You cannot conquer while constantly explaining yourself. You cannot rise while constantly checking if others are comfortable with your pace. In the early stages, you will have many around you, friends, supporters, well-wishers. They'll applaud your discipline. They'll celebrate your small victories. They'll offer advice, encouragement, validation. But what they really admire is not your ambition, it's your proximity. You are still within reach, You still need them. You are still part of the circle. The moment your progress accelerates, the moment your vision surpasses theirs, that support begins to fade. Not because they no longer care, but because your direction threatens their stillness. They want you to grow, just not more than them. They want you to win, just not in a way that reminds them they've been idle. This is where isolation becomes necessary. Not emotional coldness, but strategic withdrawal. You must begin to separate your momentum from their opinions. You must learn to thrive without applause, to walk alone without fear, because the road to dominance is not a shared experience. It is an internal war, a process of stripping away illusions, of choosing purpose over connection and vision over comfort. The men who are feared in history, who left legacies carved into stone, were not surrounded by love. They were surrounded by silence, by enemies, and by the weight of solitude that only those with destiny on their shoulders understand. To remain attached is to remain vulnerable. The very people who claim to love you will, often without realizing it, ask you to slow down for the sake of familiarity. They'll cloak it in concern, in nostalgia, in emotional memory. But behind every gentle pull back is a resistance to your evolution. They don't want to lose you, but what they really mean is they don't want to be left behind. Their love is not for your future self, but for the version of you that needed them, that followed, that kept them emotionally significant. The more you rise, the more you'll realize that loyalty is rarely unconditional. People stay loyal as long as you remain manageable, as long as your ambition doesn't eclipse theirs, as long as your independence doesn't challenge their influence. But when you begin to move like a sovereign, unbothered, unchained, unshaken, their loyalty turns to doubt. They begin to question your motives, not because they are unclear, but because your clarity reveals their lack of it. The world loves a fighter until he starts winning. They praise visionaries until the vision is realized. And once it is, they call him dangerous, distant, disconnected. This is the paradox of power. To rule, you must detach from the very people who gave you comfort in your weakness. You cannot lead while still asking to be understood. You cannot dominate while still being emotionally available to those who fear your intensity. They will say you've changed, that you've lost yourself, that you've become cold. In truth, you've simply become committed. You've stopped explaining. You've stopped apologizing. You've stopped negotiating with mediocrity. Isolation does not mean hatred. It means precision. It means knowing that every unnecessary conversation is a leak in the ship, that every emotional entanglement is a potential anchor, that every familiar voice is a doorway back to the world you were meant to outgrow. Dominance requires that you close those doors not with cruelty, but with finality. The cost of greatness is not pain, it is separation, and the price of commanding respect is the willingness to walk alone long enough that the world is forced to follow in silence.